Good afternoon, everybody. This is Eric Schlissel, CEO of Cure8. Thanks for joining us on our podcast today. We are joined by Seth Gardenswartz, a good friend and also a very good person to know in this industry. How you doing, Seth? Good to see you.
Great, Eric. Always a pleasure.
Always, indeed. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you ended up in this wonderful space we're in?
So I usually describe myself as a marketing and branding guy who somehow found himself in law school. And but the real story is I grew up in a room full of entrepreneurs, a family of entrepreneurs, and my folks everyone on my dad's side of the family was in the retail business. My 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 mom's dad was in the was also in a commercial environment with his family, and so I kind of grew up around the kitchen table listening to entrepreneurs talk about things like that. I worked with my family for a little bit before I went to grad school, before I went to law school, and then when I went to law school, I just gravitated to business and transactional work. I was always particularly interested in technology, IP, and brands in particular, and so I sort of went that direction. I moved back home to my hometown and wound up working in a tech firm for about 8 years in-house. So I sort of had this, worked in the business but with legal responsibilities kind of thing. And so, I would say that what is really helpful about my background is I really sort of sit in the business chair or put myself in the business chair most of the time when I'm trying to think about the problems or the challenges or whatever the opportunities that my clients have. In 2015, I left the tech firm, and my wife, who was then in tech transfer at San Diego National Labs, put me on a panel with her friend actually, Candace Owens, who's a securities and corporate attorney. And the short story for this podcast is we've been partners ever since. So now we have a boutique business law firm that we have about 6 attorneys. We've got a couple staff people, and we work with emerging businesses all over the country. Obviously, a lot here in the Southwest, but we're licensed in 4 or 5 states. And my side of the business, in particular, the IP side, is a federal practice. So we have clients in many states who work on their brand licensing and sort of that whole sort of soft IP side of the business. So,
That's great. Are you finding that most of the IP work is around branding, or does it vary and get into other parts of IP?
it varies. It varies quite a bit. But I was talking to a friend of mine who's a friend of a family friend, attorney, and said something like, "Oh, those businesses don't have much IP, do they?" And I was like, "Dude, everyone's got it. It's 2024, man. Everyone, there's IP in every business. You either have it or you're using it, and it's just as important to understand what the legal ramifications of that really are." I think that there's 3 registrable types of IP: patent, copyright, and trademark. And so patent is how you do something. It's got to be unique and non-obvious and valuable enough to really worry about. So, in the cannabis business, aside from grow tech and things like that, there's certainly patentable stuff everywhere. But in terms of what's likely to pop up, less. You're probably not inventing a new way, a patentable way to grow or sell, products. To produce products, very possible. Like if you've got a machine that's a new way to extract or distill or create whatever, and there's plenty of that stuff out there. It may still not be patentable, or you might, more importantly, worry about someone else's patent you're coming across. Keep in mind, it's not patentable if the technology itself is unique to cannabis, because you can't get any federal protections for a lot of, or it may not be patentable, right? Because
I'm going to jump in here because that's fascinating. So let's say I come up with a new extraction technique.
Right.
I have to prove that it works with other plants and products
Right.
as well as cannabis, and not mention cannabis at all.
Well, you don't. It can't be unique.
Application doesn't matter, right?
Right. But if your process is unique to, let's say, THC, and so keep in mind. So I'm not a patent lawyer. So those are, so there's. I'm not going to opine on that.
fair.
But let's take the trademark example, because I know it really well.
Yeah, that's totally
if
fair.
if
Scratch
you've
that.
got a brand, let's say you're going to be Schissel's shop of
Chisels.
Schlissel, yeah, yeah. I'm trying to come up with a cannabis S, something cool.
Yeah.
Um, you can't file federal trademark protection because the product itself is not you can't legally use it. You can't legally use the brand to sell cannabis, right? So so a question I get all the time is, oh, I can't, can I trademark my cannabis brand for cannabis? And the absolutely correct answer to that question is no. But that's the wrong question. The question is, how can I best protect my brand, given that I'm a integrated dispensary or whatever it is? And there's probably some things that you're doing that can be protected with the trademark. And keep in mind that M&M Mars, when they go send the cease and desist letters to say, hey, you can't make edibles that look like our candies, um, they've got a brand that's registered in class 30, probably as a food and snack class. And the fact that you're not registered, and if you were registered, you'd be in a different class, makes no difference to them. You're still confusing the customer about the source of the goods, and they can use that right to prevent you from using it. So if you're so anyway, the question is always the right question is not like look if I ask you a question about if I ask you a question about technology, I'm probably not going to ask as good a question as you could ask, right? So you could correctly answer my dumb question, or you could say, what is Seth really getting at here, right? So that's kind of the way that we think about the cannabis brands.
Well, that's really interesting how traditional law has to be viewed when it comes to an untraditional marketplace. That's fascinating. And I am curious in terms of what's patentable in a business practice in cannabis. It seems like most of the methods that growers use are prevalent in other ag businesses. Same with retail. Manufacturing's really where that sweet spot is, right?
Right.
When it comes to
Very likely. And even there, it's like, really, the caramel industry is not using that, or
right,
the caffeinated industry is not using that you're probably actually using someone else's, to the extent that anything you're doing is patentable. It's, and by the way, like the compound is not patentable, the algorithm is not patent, or when I say not, like generally not, like very difficult.
yeah,
But if you've got, what I try to describe it as, patent is kind of the way you do something. If you figure out a new, better way to turn, to remove chewing gum from a carpet, with a new machine that works differently, that's like it's got to be, sort of the statutory issue. It's got to be unique, not prior used, and not obvious, not like something that everybody would know, or anyone skilled in the arts would know. And then people often go, oh, mine's unique and not obvious. I'm like, yeah, but someone can do it a tiny bit differently. You're not really going to have any value in that. Like, there's a little bit of value when you're, I don't know, let's say looking for investors to say you've got a couple patents,
hmm
but they're not really protecting your market. So when you talk about registerable IP, there's if you've got a reputation for doing something really well, which is kind of your tech, kind of your service, kind of your contact, like all this together is like Cure8. That's you've got a reputation for quality. On the day you started, you had no reputation for quality, right? You had a good Rolodex and a talent for people, but you develop that reputation, and it goes one way or the other, right? You sort of have this. I was just talking to a new client this morning, and I always show them this. I have this slide that's a picture of merchant marks from Norwich, England, in the 16th century, and they're all these like crude designs. They're not crude. They're actually kind of cool, but they're simple. They're just lines and shapes that a merchant would carve into their knife blade, or their cook pot, and so who made it. It's like, oh, that's Eric's mark. That's Eric, and Eric's got a pretty good reputation for quality, but Bob's are heavier, longer lasting, more expensive, whatever the thing is. So you want to know what you're buying. What's half the policy side behind it. The other half is, if you know what you're buying, you don't want to rip off Eric's good reputation. for so you shouldn't be allowed. That's the P in IP. That's the property side. That's my reputation. You can't rip it off.
And that speaks to confusion in the marketplace.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like who
So
made this?
yeah, what happens with all of these unpatentable ideas in cannabis when it go federally legal? Does your phone ring off the hook?
Um, well, I think that most things that are patentable in cannabis are probably patentable not just for cannabis. Like if you've got a new way, if you've got a new way to use compressed nitrogen to as a joint roll as a rolling machine, you could roll cigarettes with it. You could do other things with it, right? You could patent it as a device for assembling these different kinds of products and the you know it would really have to be specific to the Schedule One, product. That would be. I mean, you could do it for. Again, I'm not a patent lawyer, so but like potentially hemp, right, or a hemp derivative, any CBD kinds of things. There's another issue with CBD that people are not don't always hip to, which is that the FDA hasn't ruled on it as a ingestible product. So therefore, you also can't get federal trademarks for edibles um, in the edible class. So
And CBD.
even CBD.
Wow.
Right. Right.
So
So
descheduling would solve for that regardless of federal law, right?
descheduling well, if it's in order to get a trademark, you don't register trade. So people don't own the word or the image. People
Yeah.
That's a common misconception. Apple does not own the word Apple. They own the right to use the word Apple to serve as a source of origin for certain products and services, right? So in the case of scheduling, any service or product that is not federally legal, you can't get a trademark right in to say that I'm the source of Eric's murder for hire. Sorry, murder for hire is not legal. So we're not going to give you Eric as a trademark for that.
So will people with existing trademarks or patents simply add the classes?
That's exactly what will happen. They'll add classes. They'll get. Because what will happen right now is so commonly people will do things like they'll register it for T-shirts in class 25 for apparel, right? For
Mm-hmm.
like okay, that's better than nothing, right? But you're not really a T-shirt company. So if so I always say again my go-to example is Delta. You got Delta Dental, Delta Faucets, Delta Airlines. They're all registered trademarks. The marks are identical, like the not the logos, but the logos are pretty similar. They all have triangles in them, but they're not. They can be registered because you don't walk into Lowe's and go, "Oh, cool, my dental plan's making toilets now." It's just not. They're so far apart. It's not reasonable that the reasonable consumer would assume that Delta Dental is now making plumbing fixtures. So or vice versa. So in that case, the reason that's important is they'll add classes. Sure, they'll add these classes that would be straight up for smokers goods and smokable articles and things like that and non-medicated or medicated. That's going to be an interesting thing. The WIPO, the World IP Association, has put out some guidance on, hey, if cannabis does get descheduled or become federally legal, here are the classes that it will probably fit into. So that's helpful. And then of course there's state trademarks. So we've always done a lot of state trademarks. And again, I've probably done them in 10 or 12 states or more, and even though I'm only licensed in 2, but we're allowed to do that because it's basically follows the federal law. We read the statutes but if your state has a cannabis statute, you can file state trademarks. Now, what are the protections from that? They're not as much as they're nowhere close to the federal protections. And does it help you when you go to a neighboring state? Not really. Or not that much. But with the state of the world the way it is now, it's definitely a stepping stone. And new businesses always ask the same question. They say, I want to be able to use this name. Mature businesses say, I want to make sure no one else can use this name. Like those are two very different levels of property, right? So the state trademark gives you a stick in the ground, but someone can overcome that stick. Someone can say, no, I've got senior federal rights, and if my rights are senior, meaning they happened first in time, and my rights are federal, which means that even though if I've never been or sold a good to in your state, I can still enforce my federal rights. And there's many ugly stories about how that people believe it's not true, but it is.
That leads to lawsuits. A lot
Mm.
of people like to avoid
Many bad
lawsuits.
things. All bad things, if they get bad enough, lead to lawsuits.
It's funny. I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other night that said, all bad things lead to violence. I guess lawsuits are a
Well,
form of violence, right?
lawsuits are in lieu of violence. Like the idea is that before you get your gang on the truck or in the woods and bring your clubs, and you actually present your case in front of subject to the law. That's like a nation of laws kind of thing. That's the whole idea. Rule of law, not because actually violence often is assault, battery, like it's also against the law.
Well, I'll let him know. He's an attorney. Maybe he'll stop practicing.
No, no,
He's a defense attorney, though. So
but no,
it's interesting.
I think that's commonly, it's like all conflicts lead to violence if they don't get interrupted at some point. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
people either you watch your kids play, they when they don't agree, they get violent. They get but if there's and sometimes they say, well, gee, I really want to smack you in the mouth, but
Right.
I'll get in trouble with mom and dad, right? So
Yeah. But I
that's
guess
the
you can
rule. That's
argue
the rule of
that
law.
if you violate the rule of law, then the state might inflict some violence upon you, be it financial or
Might
whatever.
deprive you of life, liberty. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no
Well,
happiness there either.
right. No.
So let's shift back a little bit to how you got into this industry to begin with your
Sure.
partner.
Sure. No. So interestingly, we're both really tech lawyers. So Candace grew up in Silicon Valley. She started at Cooley, big, Silicon Valley law firm, and so she's doing, dominantly finance deals and corporate structures for, and ancillary legal stuff for tech companies. And she moves out here 15, 16, 18 years ago. I grew up, again in the business community and went into tech as soon as I reasonably could after starting my practice, and worked in house in a tech company for a long time. Worked with I worked with a large number of startups doing all kinds of startups and mature companies doing sort of this IP piece. So we formed the firm, and randomly I had at the time we formed the firm, because there was a brief period of time where I had a little solo practice that I started just as sort of a side hustle because my big client at the time I needed a practice to build through to get all that stuff. So I just wouldn't do any work I didn't love doing. Like I just said, and people would say, "Hey, will you look at my divorce settlement for me?" I'm like, absolutely no, never. Will you do this? Kind of, it's like, no, no, no. Will you do, like, no? Will you do my trademark for me? Oh yeah, I'll do your trademark for you. That'll be fun. And so suddenly I've got clients. I just had, it was kind of fun, and I was having a good time with it. I bumped into two guys. I had a random encounter with a couple of people that changed my life. And one of them was the then director of the New Mexico Brewers Guild, and the other one was one of the large local. And I was kind of into craft beer, but I didn't really know the players. I didn't know any of that. And I wound up today. Our firm represents 65% of the beer brewed in our state by volume, right? So I just sort of got working on the community, and it was really interesting to get that. To understand not just the trademark law, but we really got to know the industry well. So suddenly, we can give much. Our advice is like, oh yeah. Before you tell me, here's what I think is probably on your mind. And it's like, no, that's in class 33. Here's what that was really fun to get into, and a really fun industry and fun clients. Not like 70% of our practice, but it's 70% or 80% of what people want to talk about when I tell them that we do it, right? So I had that part of the practice going. So Candace and I start working together, and all my IP and related tech clients, they need corporate work. And all her corporate clients need IP and technical contracts and all the stuff that I do. So immediately our practice kind of gets going. And actually we started at another firm together. And then after about a year, we like, gee, most of what we're doing seems to come from us. So we picked up and took our clients and started this firm. Right? So we would have our annual meeting every year on a chairlift. The high speed lift, we had not much to talk about. One of the old lifts, if we had a little bit more to talk about. And every year it was like, should we do any cannabis work? We're always like, nah. And why? Well, at the time, there were only 35 licensees in our state because it was medical only.
Your state being New Mexico, just
My state being New Mexico. I'm licensed in Colorado, but I wasn't like our firm was growing pretty fast anyway, so there's no reason to go run out there and do it, like to go and plus it seemed like all anyone was doing was regulatory work and like, oh, really regulatory work? So it wasn't like the gee, only do stuff I want to do. Regulatory work not high on the list. So what happened is one of my friends here was a principal in one of the medical, the medical organizations, and had a trademark project. And I was like, this is cool. It ain't normal. It's got all this weird federal state stuff. You get like it was cool. So I was like, yeah, that was fun. So that was my first cannabis client. So I'm like thinking, there's a lot of cool trademark and brand work to be done in this space. And by the way, no one's really thinking about the brand stuff. That's going to be big in a couple of years. So I got a little bit interested. I was becoming kind of curious professionally, and then Candace had a really big hemp client, like a big industrial hemp client, so all farm bill legal kind of stuff. Opened our eyes on how big the industry is, and then one of their colleagues mentioned to us that in the more mature states, and I don't mean like very mature, but by like year one after recreational passes, there's at least as many business attorneys as there are regulatory attorneys. So our state shortly thereafter passes its adult use law, and so it's like a year and a half before the sales are going to start. And we look around, we realize there's no attorneys who are holding themselves out as working on the business side. They're all we'll help you get your license, we'll help you do this, that. And we were like, this seems like kind of a thing that people are going to need. So we just said, all right, we're not going to do licensure. We're not going to do, sort of that straight up regulatory only work. We're going to do the structure. We're going to do the finance. We're going to do the inter-business contracts, the wholesale contracts, we could help with even lease reviews. I was always amazed that obviously people like to cut corners when they, some people like to cut corners, but they're like, oh, we'll take the local New Mexico commercial lease form, which says right there, big and bold, that violating state or federal laws is a breach of the lease. Like, I want to edit that, and your broker can't do it, by the way, because they're not a lawyer. So we just jumped in, and we jumped in with both feet. Candace was very, she basically, for about 6 weeks, I spent time getting up to speed on cannabis, sort of learning the industry. And we went to the shows, and we got to know the other lawyers. And once we started referring clients to them, they really believed us when we said, we're not going to do what you guys do. Mm-hmm. And anyone with a multi-member LLC, not anyone, but lots of them came through our firm. So, there was a big initial, stand-up phase where we stood up a bunch of new businesses, and today we represent, and not just locally, but regionally, we represent manufacturers, and we represent, vertically integrated and retail people who are licensing, obviously locally in this state, in Colorado, in Maryland, in California. We can represent people who are, under local state law, we're licensed, doing formations and things like that. And elsewhere, and everywhere else, we can do trademarks, we can do inter-party agreements, and we can do a lot of the brand licensing stuff, because more and more all these consumer brands are being manufactured by somebody within the state who licenses the 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 brands, the SOPs, a number of other things, and then there's a lot of detail that belongs in those agreements that are often not in those agreements. Like very frequently we see it's like, gee, who's going to do the sales and marketing? Like, oh, we all know who's going to do it. It's like, great. What if all of you people here in the room are not here in, I don't know, a week, a month, a year?
Yeah.
What's going to happen then? And people often don't know the answers to that. So, and that's just from a practical point of view. If you are bringing a brand into a new state and you're not really well known in that state, if you're not a national brand or someone who's been, like you think about New Mexico, Colorado, right? Colorado rec for a long time. So there are a lot of people in New Mexico and Arizona, who knew Colorado brands, but they probably only knew the top 10. They didn't know some of the other ones. So if they're coming down here licensed, and vice versa, Arizona's got a very robust economy in cannabis, and New Mexico has grown really, really fast. So, but I think that dynamic is true, or the functions of that dynamic is true. I saw a really interesting slide at the Cannabis Marketing Association conference this summer that showed national brands have a much higher total market share in brand new markets. And as the markets mature, that changes because the local brands have a chance to establish themselves. So people say, oh my God, XYZ national brand is coming. Oh, it's not fair. I was like, really? Because all the weed is supposed to be grown here. So why don't you establish your brand, or why don't you be a cookies licensee, or whichever one it might be. So and that's hard work creating that brand. There's a reason it sells easier, because they've already convinced the consumer
They've invested.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to see the national brands go into local markets, but I don't see them pushing people out, especially innovative folks.
Absolutely not. They're taking what's tried and true. They're like comedians, right? They've done their hits in small clubs, and they've seen what bombs, they see what works. Then they do the big Netflix special, and it's all the ones that they know. But so What that means is they're not going to go trying out new products in your market. And if you can see this niche, that's important. And I think so. One of the patterns we see a lot in these in almost every industry is somebody innovates at the top of the market.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that is successful, they successfully can bring it down a level so you look at like Tesla, for example, where they innovated at the $100,000 car market, and now they're selling cars competitively against just basic mid-sized sedans. And they worked out a lot of stuff. They had the margins and the time and but they've been able to do that. So I think that is always an opportunity for local brands.
A lot of the opportunity is also while they're up here eating up the bottom of the market. It's
for
such
sure.
a good strategy.
For sure, because you've got all this. Margin buys you so much if you can do it right. And by the way, when you talk to those guys, but very few of them actually start at the top. There are people who are in some mid-market dispensary, and they just realize they've got customers asking for stuff that no one's producing.
Yep.
They're like, that seems like a pretty good niche. It's not big enough for one of the big. Suddenly that's the big deal. So
there's always opportunity in competition. There's always opportunity in market adjustments. I think that it's hard for somebody that has started a business, looks at somebody else coming in a similar business and says, oh shit, they're going to eat my lunch. Right. The more mature business owners look at that and say, oh, well, you know what? Maybe they'll have some of it, but why don't I just start cooking something new?
Right.
Why don't I expand out? And that's hard for business owners, especially when it's small and you don't have the finances. That panic is what sinks a lot of people.
It's do you ever read Crossing the Chasm? Um,
No,
um,
I'm familiar with the title, but tell
yeah,
tell.
yeah. So Clay Christensen is the author. So he's a Harvard business professor, and so he says something really interesting. He says, you've got a big mature company, and they've got a ton of market share, and they've got all this infrastructure built around it, and then some executive says, "Hey, I've got an idea. We could sell our product at like a quarter of the cost if we did it this way." And they're like, "Are you crazy?" He's like, "No, it'll totally work. I need like $2 million, and I can go do the research and get it done." They're like, "If you're successful, you'll destroy our whole market. You'll mess up all of our stuff." Well, and so they say no. They don't give him the money, so he quits and he go raises $2 million and he eats their lunch.
Yep.
Over 5 years. So they've got too much invested in how it is
That's
to
exactly
sort
it.
of get down the road. Their stock price is based on month to month or quarter to quarter. It's
Well, it's hard to look at all that revenue and say, okay, well, let's fuck that up because if we don't, somebody else might,
right.
right?
Right, because you always believe it's not going to happen. You go talk to a Yellow Pages producer, and there's still a shockingly large amount of revenue but
Yeah,
every year it's a little smaller. Like it's not a secret where it's going. It's a little bit of a secret when it's going to go to functionally zero, or but it's already kind of happened. Like they you pay Yellow Pages rates for how many driveways they throw the books onto, right? Not page views. Not the way that we sell digital ads, right? Based on actual, you dominantly actual data, or at least conceivably actual data, just based on how many driveways they can throw the book onto.
right.
They're like, oh, each of those is a pair of eyeballs, or a couple of pairs of eyeballs, like
Yeah,
2.4 pair of eyeballs. Bullshit. Like but they're able to do it because some people are just because the consumers too are habituated, just like, well, we got to be in the Yellow Pages,
right.
we got to do that, and maybe they do, maybe they,
I don't know. That's the reason why AOL still collects money from people who think that they need dial up to keep their AOL address. That's been going on for 30 years or 20 years or whatever.
Right, right. Yeah, no, there is some residual revenue in all those things.
Yeah, there's
Um,
value there.
yeah, there's definitely value there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to watch people try to take some of those, moving assets and breathe new life in them. Yahoo has changed hands a number of times.
Yep.
People keep, they have eyeballs, they have a captive audience in their
Right.
email. Somebody should be able to figure out a business model around that and actually generate some revenue, but we
Yeah.
haven't seen it yet.
We
But
haven't
that's
we
the
haven't
that's the
seen it.
cycle of things. Let's talk about New Mexico a little bit more. It's an unlimited marketplace, right? Unlimited licenses.
Right.
So, are you seeing oversaturation at this point and intense competition, or is it kind of right-sized itself at this point?
It has not right-sized itself. It's there are more dispensaries in Albuquerque than Starbucks and McDonald's combined.
No.
Yes, that's a off-cited figure in the industry. So let's talk about some good things
Yeah.
about that situation. Let's start with that. New Mexico has the highest percentage of minority ownership of licenses in the country. I think it's 48%
Is that
or
due to the social equity program being successful, or just by nature of the state?
I think, well, obviously there's more than one thing involved in it,
Sure.
but it's not because it's got a very complicated social equity, like it's because there's no limit on licenses. And so the licensees kind of by units kind of reflect the population of the state, which is got a lot of non-white people in it, right? So that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of rural people, like all the things that are sort of, and in our statute, there a lot of them are kind of not exactly aspirational, but there's not like quotas or count by county or things like that. But just sort of it's sort of worked out the way. That's kind of that is definitely a good thing. Like I would say objectively that's a good thing. However, it is quite problematic that we have way more licenses than the state can support. So we've got in the range of the number of licenses that Colorado has, with half the population and a quarter of the income, right? So that doesn't seem right. And when I mentioned to my friends that I our practice involves cannabis, they're like, "Wow, what's going to happen?" It's a disaster, right? There's 2 dispensaries in every strip mall. And I say, well, if you believe in capitalism, it's going to be fine.
Right.
It's going to be kind of ugly for a while,
Right.
because a lot of these, the phrase that always makes me twitch when people say, "Oh, dude, it's a license to print money." I'm like, no, it's not. It's actually a really difficult, complicated, challenging business with onerous tax implications and a lot of regulation and all the stuff that makes it even harder. So people get into it with unreasonable expectations, and they and all of the money is friends and family, or a lot of it's friends and family. And so not only do the investors not really know what they're in for, but they can't really help. Like if you took your father-in-law's money, who has a great job as a, I don't know, um, uh, a framer, or even like a bookkeeper or something else, they're not really going to be able to help you address the competitive landscape in the cannabis market, at wholesale. Like that. No, maybe they can, but not because they've got experience with it. Like they haven't seen it before. So I think that's a little bit of a challenge, and I think that's a really hard thing about the industry fundamentally, because it takes a lot of capital.
Mm-hmm.
And if I always say, when people are investing in your company, you want people who have a lot of capital, and hopefully have experience you can use. Like, that's ideal. We call that smart money, right? People who say, "Oh, I know all these people and I know all this stuff. I'm going to put my money in you, and then I'm going to help you make our money more valuable." That's ideal. But what happens a lot in cannabis is, I got my some pension money and a little bit of this, and I'm going to mortgage, whatever, and I'm going to throw it in. I'm going to raise objectively about half what I really needed to do this.
Yeah.
And then, there's just not that many of them can survive. So in this market, I think we're way over retailed. We have way too many retail outlets. I've talked to a number of people who started a couple of years ago and kind of have caught this idea. It's like, we're going to focus on just wholesale, right? I'm like, oh, gee, that sounds really smart, right? Because there's a lot of retail shops that don't have much inventory, and there's a lot of people who said, I can grow great. That's the other, like, license to print money and do I grow the best weed. Those are the two things where you're like, ugh. Do I want to? I hope these guys are one of the exceptions, because everyone thinks they grow the best weed. First of all, you got to grow it at scale and consistently, and all this other stuff.
Different thing than growing in your closet.
It's very different. And look, my craft brewer, clients say the same thing.
Right.
It's like, yeah, you can brew a really good batch once in a while, but if you're going to, if you have 10 SKUs, on tap at any given time, 5 of them are probably year rounds, and those should be very, very similar. They should get maybe incrementally better, or more exact to the style, but they shouldn't range a lot. Like, that's not brand. That's like neighborhood bar. That's not brand.
100%.
Right?
It's like my father-in-law telling me that I should open a restaurant after he eats a batch of ribs I made. I can't replicate that.
Exactly.
No.
No, exactly. And you were around your friends and family, and you were having like as many things
doing the thing.
Yeah, everything that contributes to that feeling you have about that. No, that is all exactly true. So, I'm like, gee, if you're going to be in this market, like, look around and see what's. I talked to this acquaintance of mine who really wanted to get in the industry. He was really excited about it. I said, why don't you go work in the industry for 6 months or a year?
Great advice.
He thanked me so much. He was like, glad I didn't get in then. I would have gotten hurt. Learned a ton of stuff, and now it's like, oh, this is what the industry needs. Like I've been around this. Yeah, they see an angle, and like look at yourself. Look at Cure8. You're not selling weed. Like you're like the whole Levi Strauss metaphor.
I sell shovels.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it takes a certain appetite for risk, and the distressing part is that a lot of people don't realize how risky it really is.
Right.
And also, people get really thrown off by first mover advantage. You're the first one to open in your town, and you have time. You have a little window before somebody else comes in, depending on the license, the state, and so on. But a lot of this we saw in Ontario. We did a ton of build outs in 2018 in Ontario.
Sure.
At this point, we've done a couple of hundred up there. And
Sure.
I don't know how many of those are still in business. And some of them have gotten consolidated, but there was this runway that people had, the
Right.
first mover advantage, for 12 to 18 months because their licensing system was all batchy and it wasn't
Right.
safe. That being said, people overexpanded.
Right.
When money is easy, it's
Right.
easy to make bad decisions and not notice. And then when those screws tighten, it's a real problem to get out of.
So so an example I can totally relate to there was way before I went to law school even. My family was in the retail business. And when there is more demand than the market can really keep up with, and that's, let's just say the so in this example, the city's growing, and the city's growing faster so that meant that our business was growing.
Right.
And so the cancer on your profitability in retail is always your inventory, because you have to buy stuff before you can sell it, right? Way before, and it sits. So if your ratio of the amount of inventory you have sitting on your balance sheet to your sales is a important metric in retail. Um, and so what we found out is that when your sales are growing like 15% a year, let's just say, not a crazy growth rate, but a very healthy growth rate, there's all kinds of mistakes that you're making all the time you don't really see until your sales growth levels out to like 11%. And then suddenly, the fact that you are overbuying in certain categories, suddenly those little icebergs like break the surface.
Yep.
Like, and they break the surface, and that, like, oh shit, I don't have the money to buy the stuff I need because I invested in all the stuff that people weren't buying.
And then
Um,
you have a flash sale on those items and it devalues your
Right. It
brand.
means you
And then
sell it at
the
low
cycle.
margin, and then you hurt your, yeah, all that stuff. So I totally agree with that when things are good, and first mover advantage too. When I think of first mover advantage, I think of it in terms of like the tech space,
Mm,
where if you're the first mover, you can establish your brand in a really dominant way because
yeah.
people will come behind you. But if you're not doing that, you're just getting the sales that anybody who's got the goods or service is going to get because there's more demand than supply. Like that's not that's like winning in Vegas. You're it's not it's less about skill and more about kind of being some hybrid of the two.
Yeah.
Once the competition catches up, now it's about execution.
Yeah.
Now it's about and if you don't have if you've got some brand equity, if I go to my favorite pizza place and I have, my food's a little underdone, it clips the brand equity in my mind, but not that much. Like if I go there, like it's like, oh gee, I sent it back, no big deal, right? But if it starts happening more and more, that happens really fast. And if I'm not the
Well,
only one, it goes away really fast. Like, oh, Acme Pizza used to be great, but now they suck. You're sitting in that little, you're in part of that foursome in the playing golf or having beers. You hear someone say that, you're like, oh, all right, I'm going
yeah.
someplace else.
Yeah. And a lot of folks end up in that I can only afford to fix one problem cycle.
Yeah.
And it's systemic. Like there's so many things that go wrong when it starts going downhill. But if given the right advice up front, I think a lot of entrepreneurs would do significantly better. And we're seeing this in New York. A lot of people are asking really good questions. It seems like a lot of them know something about what they don't know, but
That's
they're not sure who to ask. They're not sure who to go to. It's going to be scary because this is anybody can get a license, right? There's not a lot of barrier to entry there. If you apply, you have a shot. And the
right,
application was short and it's a random lottery. And so a lot
right,
of the people that are on the list, there's, I don't know, 2,200 that are being looked at. A significant portion of them were like, I didn't think I'd get this far. I'm not sure what to do now. And so what we're trying to do at Cure8 and what we're trying to do at Forte and so on is trying to educate folks and bring them in and say, look, this is what we've learned. We've seen this happen in a dozen markets at this point. This is how things will play out. This is how you can be prepared. What advice would you give to somebody in that unknown kind of, it seems like an unlimited marketplace. It seems like a lot of people don't know what they're getting into. How would you advise?
I think I would say play a couple thought experiments, right? Um, like a good, bad, even thought experiment. But here's the thing: none of those is going to be that things are going to be like it is today. Like things are going to be different in, let's just say, 18 months. Visualize how they're going to be different. So, for example, if sales are so most states report their monthly sales on a on some kind of whatever their regulatory body is. So you can kind of do some calcs about what mature markets are like, and there's plenty of data out there in the marketplace you can go look at for other states and people who looked at mature states versus. But say you can sort of look at Colorado right now, like the most mature state. So people are abandoning licenses. Usage is down among the youngest population of consumers. There's all kinds of dynamics going on there. It's like, okay, that could be our destination. What's different about my marketplace that would hedge against that? Oh, nothing. It's worse. We have an unlimited license state. Okay, so we might get there faster. So that might be one part of it. So if that's the case, what's going to happen to down there and what should I be doing? Well, what I should not be doing maybe is opening more locations. Maybe I want to save some more money. So when those locations are distressed, I can pick them up cheap.
Yeah.
Maybe like just as an example, like that might be one way to do that. Because the other thing that's true is, so as you and I have both been to some trade shows in the past few months, they haven't been exactly happy, cheery places where people are full of unbridled enthusiasm, right? It's been like, oh, money's hard to come by. A lot of professionals are telling me that their clients are running out of money. Um, they're cutting all kinds of that stuff, right? So think about what place you'd want to be in if that's going to happen, or when that's going to happen in your industry. There will be business cycles, and so there is some theoretical maturity to the marketplace in soda, in burgers, in hotel rooms, in storage, like all those things. People tend to overbuild. Like they don't build exactly to the right level. That's not how market economies work. There's there's look at right now. If you've got residential real estate, you're in a great place. If you've got office real estate, not so much, right? So there's some smart money doing conversions from offices to apartments, right?
Yeah.
So what do you need for that? You need money.
Lots of
Like,
money.
yeah,
Yeah.
lots of money because right now borrowing is expensive. So if you were a forward-looking real estate developer, you might have sold some of your office buildings, when cap rates were crazy low, right before, hopefully when at the right time. And then you'd have a bunch of cash sitting around that you could actually, because convert an office to a
That's a
residential
lot.
is expensive. It's very expensive. So, and maybe that's the wrong thing to do in your market or whatever market you want to get involved in. But I think the advice I would have is don't keep telling yourself, once you hear people say it's like, oh, this is not your father's cannabis market, this is not your mother's real estate market, it's like that means that people have drank the Kool-Aid. They're no longer thinking with historical, example.
Yeah.
Beer consumption in the United States is down by volume, right? It's up in dollars, but not very much, like a tiny bit. So, and people are like, that's crazy. I see breweries opening all the time. Yeah, there's more tiny, little bitty, local, hyper local breweries opening because they can get a brewer's license in their state for less than a liquor license. And they can brew a couple hundred barrels of beer, and they can buy some other local beers and maybe some local wines and spirits and have a really cool neighborhood bar. And they're sucking that revenue out of the Chili's or the Applebee's that's around the corner. But the actual growth is pretty small. And is it because people don't? And there's a bunch of things driving that, right? Age of the population, health issues, cannabis, possibly a lot of discussion about that. But the point is, these markets are pretty mature. Look at Bud Light. They kind of stepped in it. They had but the fact that Modelo is the number one selling beer, like if you're not in the industry, you're like, really? It's like, oh yeah, actually Mexican imports have been on the rise for a while because they're seen as premium and they're cheaper
Hmm.
than real craft. They're
You just hit on something really interesting because what I think a lot of people in the rush to open, right? There's this rush to open, and you're thinking about all these things, and you're not thinking about what happens when everything flattens, right? I'm loyal to my local shop because I walk by it on my way home.
Right,
If
right,
they don't have what I want, I'm just going to go somewhere else,
right,
and I'm not going to think twice about it. I like those guys. I know them.
right,
They're great. But what with Jane and some of these online, features that allow you to search for a product anywhere and
right.
it gets delivered to wherever you are, all of a sudden there's literally no competitive advantage. The only competitive advantage is the lowest price you could possibly sell it for.
Right.
And it creates a downward spiral. And to your point, how do you look out for that before it happens?
There's a shop on my way to many places I go, like right around the corner of my house, and it's got these little handwritten signs out in the front that say like $8 a gram. And it doesn't even. I was like, okay, um, you're just completely commoditizing this product, and if somebody is 7.89 a gram, um, people who are really price sensitive are gonna maybe, again, if you're right on the way home, and by the way, even right on the way home, 20% of people move every year,
Yeah.
move or change their job or something, so you gotta grow 25% a year to stay even. Uh, I think if when you say the cheapest possible thing, so what is cheap, right? So if I say I've got a Polar Tech fleece vest for $20, is that cheap? If I say I've got oops, that's my hand, that's the AI. Um,
I
uh,
can't trigger that. I've tried to trigger that
I've
a
tried
million
it,
times.
it's not really working. There's
It doesn't
some
work.
Harry Potter thing. But if I say it's a Patagonia Polar Test, like $20 is like, ooh, like how used is it? Like
Yeah,
that's great.
right.
So when people do things like that, sometimes they'll use strains, but of course strains vary a lot on who grew it, or yeah. But when you have a brand, when you say, oh, it's 2 for 1 Acme, or 20% off your second, whatever else, then suddenly people like, because other than people who are really, really close to the industry or close to the market, we all rely on other things to say what quality is. Call that brand equity, call that whatever else is. But if you've got a brand of soda, of chips, of food, of insurance, like that is meaningful to be. And if you say that, we used to talk about this all the time in retail, we'd say, oh, I've got running shoes for $49. Is that cheap? Are they Asics? I know that every brand has a $49 shoe.
Right.
Look them for catalogs. Like they
Right.
do that. They make up the brand, right? But if you've got an inline in the catalog this year or last year's, mid range, like, and that's normally $89 and it's 59 or 40, like, yeah, that's I know that's a deal because you actually sold it for something else, or it's sold day to day for something else. So I think having that stand out ishness, and I do think in this market, in this cannabis market, there's still a ton of the sales that come from people who are heavy users,
Yes.
or very regular users. So some portion of those people are going to be relatively price sensitive. So, so understand that, and what is it that will make them loyal? Is it going to be frequency, loyalty kinds of things? The fact that you know their names and you keep their stuff in stock? Is it, what's it going to be that keeps them loyal? And for the other 20% of the market, what is kind of underrepresented in this space? Every edibles manufacturer, whether they're a single location in Los Lunas, New Mexico, or a multi-state brand, has a sleep line. They are none of them. I welcome the mail. Very few of them are really well established as a brand, right? They all say something generic like Sleep Z's or Gum Z or something like Like there's not a abstract name that you come to associate with that product, right? So Starbucks had no meaning before we came to know it as the coffee company, but no one's done that really effectively. It created that gold standard for a particular product. A fat tire is an SKU for New Belgium, right?
Right.
It just became this really it became better known than the house brand because that's just how they penetrated the market. I don't
Right.
think that was their plan. I don't know. Like maybe it was,
No.
but it was
Yeah. Well, that comes back to niches, right? If you can identify that, like soccer moms or whatever they're really called these days, they are brand loyal because they don't trust
right.
things that they don't know.
And they really appreciate people who appreciate them and make them feel like they're not being pandered to. It's
Yeah.
like I really get where you're coming from. They like any consumer who is not the core consumer. There's a great scene. I think it's Empire Records, that old movie where the people who work in the record store are the music fanatics.
Oh, yeah. I think the John Cusack movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
That
some
found
dad comes in, yeah, some dad comes in to buy a record. And the guy's like, "You're not really going to buy that. Is it a gift for someone you like?"
right.
Like it's so
This is what
snobby.
you really want.
Right, right, right. Exactly.
Yeah. High
Um,
fidelity.
yeah, it's high fidelity. That's right. It's high fidelity. It's high
Yeah.
fidelity. It's not right. It's not Empire Records. It's high fidelity. See,
Yeah.
similar. Yeah.
I don't want to walk into talk to a bud tender like that.
No, I'm gonna feel stupid. Like you don't want to make people feel stupid when
Yeah.
if you're worked retail, making people feel stupid only makes you feel good while you're saying it. The person next to you who makes the customer feel smart is gonna go home with more commission at the end of the day every time. And how many of us have bought a car? Like who's an expert when they buy a car? Like compared like you know what I mean?
Right.
So when the guy makes you feel stupid, you're like, I hate these people. I hate the process. I like it's a good example of how to think about your marketplace and what people are gonna value. So if that's your location, your recognition. Um, so I know like in the brewery space, for example, people are super brand loyal locationally to
Hmm.
places they feel comfortable, more so than the quality of the objectively, like to the extent that we could objectively say, like the number of metals or like people, like it's on my way home. They know me. I feel comfortable there. I don't feel like it's not too beer snobby if I'm not really a beer snob. It's not too like whatever your happy space is. The wait staff makes you feel good, and you can tell because if things change, you get uncomfortable. I learned this doing a piece of research for the marketplace, and my thought was that people who go out to breweries the most often go to lots of breweries,
Yeah.
right? Like I do, like or aspirationally, right? And turns out it's exactly the opposite. People who go the most often go to the same place, one or two places, almost all the time. And so I thought there was something wrong with the research. And so I bounced it off for a couple of my clients who were like, yeah, and they sit in the same seat and they order
Yeah.
the same beer.
Right. Right. They have the same
Right.
conversations over and over again. What's interesting is people keep drawing these parallels to the craft beer. Not outside of this conversation, you hear it all the time. It's like the craft beer marketplace, but it's consumed differently. And
Very,
there's no lounges in most places, and even if there were, they don't. It's not the same vibe. It's completely different.
I think that, so I use the examples of craft beer a lot because I'm so familiar with it. I think the
Yeah.
examples are easy to relate to, but I
Yeah.
don't think the industries are that similar for a number of reasons. They're different. They're a little different culturally, but I think you just hit on the real thing. It's the experiential part of it. When people choose a cannabis product, they choose it based on how they expect to feel after they've consumed it. So you and I are about the same size, right? We're about the same size human being, right?
Mhm.
So if we walk into a brewery and we each get a pint, and I might get a amber lager, and you might get like
Yeah.
if the ABVs are close and we're about the same size, we're going to feel about the same way after we've
Yep.
drank them. Mine might be malty and dark and rich, and yours might be light and crisp, and they'll really taste it. They have different mouthfeels, different levels of carbonation, but we're going to feel about the same, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm going to pick it based on I'm looking for that multi thing. I'm looking for that light thing. In cannabis, people are like, this is my preferred way to put this into my body, but I'm doing it for how I feel after it comes in. That's really different. That's a very different experience. Some people tell me that it's a different social, atmosphere because, like sitting around and also depending on your chemistry or personal, like things hit you differently. Whereas you can pretty much go to a cocktail party and you're like, I'm good for 2 glasses of wine, or I'm good for, a drink, or I'm good for whatever else. But you go to, even if you went to a consumption lounge, a place where you have them, you're not really going to know how you're going to feel
And it
unless you've
could
been
go
there
sideways
before.
pretty easily,
Right, right.
especially if they have dab stations set up and all of that. You're like, oh, I'll try that. And then you're done for the night.
I think the weekend I met you the first time was at a trade show event. And I went to some trade show and they handed me the dab straw, and I was like,
All
I'm
right.
not sure this is right for
Mm,
me.
maybe not in this environment anyway.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think it is pretty. And the other thing is, if you and I want to start a brewery, Eric, we could get an SBA loan and lease a space, buy some tanks, But if we want to start a dispensary or grow operation, we're going to have to raise money from people. We're going to give away equity.
Yep.
We're going to have to do all these things that are pretty different, very straightforward federal and state, laws, taxation, TTP, labeling, all distributors. If we're gonna play that game, very straightforward in terms of, or when I say straightforward, not simple, but not a mystery, not like a veiled mystery. We get done. Cannabis is like, gee, oh, great, you've got experience in Colorado or Oregon or whatever, and you're coming to Minnesota, laws are different, taxation's different, like everything, employment, some random employment stuff. If there's always some weird thing that the legislature had to stick in the bill to get it over that's the opposition just won. It's like, all right, we're going to lose, but we'll at least get this one thing in there, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
there's always that. So I think it's quite a bit different in that sense.
Well, we've spoken to a lot of MSOs, and we work with some of them who say that we're a compliance company that sells cannabis. That's far different than somebody that can, just put some beer out there. It's a different story and a different support system.
It's a different story. It's a different support system. There's a different level of acceptance. I've talked to some friends, even some colleagues who have been like involved one way or another in the cannabis business, and they didn't want to tell their parents, or they didn't want to tell their clients. I think it would be honest to say one of our many chairlift rides where we agreed not to do cannabis is we didn't want to be known as a dope firm. We're doing high tech stuff. Um, so, and that has definitely changed. Like in the last
It
5
has.
years, that's there's no. I don't hesitate at all to tell people
Yep.
that's part of our practice. But the craft beer certainly has national awards, and if you've got a World Beer Cup medal, people like people who don't like beer would appreciate that's a real thing. That's like a culinary kind of thing. We're not there in cannabis yet, and I think that, and just the fact there's all this kind of wacky things where it's like, oh, gee, I'm trying to get a mortgage, but I work full time in a cannabis operation, and I've got all these additional hoops I've got to jump through, or I've got to prove to my landlord that only 0.3% of their leasable space is like this weird, sort of patchwork of laws and regulations, and then local stuff too, like hyper local stuff.
100%. But on the other side of it, you have all of that. But then within the industry, people want to know that you're in it with them and that you have experience and you put it right out there. So it's like this dichotomy of conflicting needs.
I think that for me personally, like my journey in this was when we didn't get in it, and then we got in it. We got in it on our
Yeah.
website, members of the local chamber,
Yep.
go to events, post on our LinkedIn page, like the professional thing. So we're in it, and people know we're in it. And I learn something every time I talk to one of my clients about the business. But I see that as a real value to be able to, I'm learning things, but I'm able to understand, what that, to ask better questions when we're talking about a wholesale agreement or a brand licensing and manufacturing agreement or a marketing arrangement, or any of those things is becomes valuable.
We're past the days where we're collecting sacks of cash and so on, but not that far away from that. And when in life do you get to participate and have a say, a seat at the table of a new industry being born? That doesn't happen. It's so exciting.
Not something I wanted to pass up.
Yeah.
And first of all, the people are really, dominantly really great, really fun, and exciting. I'm always surprised at at the people who are in the industry, at their stories. Like, how'd you get in the industry? And they have this really fascinating story. Someone's like, oh yeah, I've been involved in this since legacy, right? But many of them are very thoughtful. Sort of, I developed this product for my elder relatives. I developed this product for someone who was getting treatment for cancer. Like, those are very interesting. Close to, I have a friend and a colleague who had a very tragic accident, and is recovered, but this was an enormous part of the recovery process. And that individual became a lobbyist for the original medical law and so forth. Like really beautiful stories. So I really enjoyed the community, and Tim feels like, oh, the stoners, they get nothing done. I'm like, actually, some of the brightest, most creative, most hardworking people I know are in the cannabis business and familiar with the product from a use basis. So
I see it. And that's, as a serial entrepreneur, this excites me. I see so many people creating, and I'm able to create new businesses and discuss entrepreneurial endeavors with other people in a way that you can't in traditional businesses. People are
right,
too protective. Here, we're pretty open about things.
right.
Other than point of sale companies stabbing each other, the rest of us talk a lot.
Well, point of sale people, obviously, that's
It's a very,
endemic. All
it's
right,
a tough business. It's
right,
very tough.
right.
Yeah. Seth, is there anything else that you would share in your experience of things that have gone horribly wrong and could have been prevented
It's a whole
in your
other podcast, but
base?
yeah,
Maybe.
yeah. Funny, we are involved in things that go horribly wrong and could have been prevented all the time.
That's kind of your job.
It's kind of, yeah, it's our real job is to help prevent them.
Of course.
Um, but a lot of times people hire us initially because they've had one of these problems. Then after that, they're really good at preventing them.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we like to say is start off right. And I have a friend who's a very successful serial entrepreneur, like very successful guy. And he says he's like, it's so much easier to do it right at the beginning than to fix it later. And I would say, so here's just a really common mistake that people make. So in the cannabis industry, they spend all their professional services money on like licensure
Yeah.
and a marketing package. And then they spend almost nothing on legal, accounting, or tech, right? So things that they're functionally going to need, because they assume that like every camera system is kind of the same, every operating agreement is kind of the same, every chart of accounts is kind of the same. And I'm just going to say, from a legal point, that is not true. So people say, well, you just use a template if you put together an operating agreement is an LLC is for an LLC. It's not your business plan. It's not your roadmap. It's who votes, how do you vote, how do people get in, how do people get out, what do we need, majority, supermajority, unanimous consent for, like who pays the taxes, what happens if someone dies, like all that stuff. And it is true that if anyone hires us or any lawyer to do a multi-member operating agreement, we're going to start from some base document that we've got. But we're going to customize that document to the client's needs. And I don't care what percentage of the words get changed or added or deleted. Those are going to be really important if you ever have to read the document because there's a conflict.
Right.
And so very, very often people have operating agreements that require unanimous consent for everybody for everything, and there's no deadlock provision. And so I was like, gee, someone not me is gonna either make a lot of money to sort this out, or, and here's the worst situation, is you got a business that's doing a couple $1,000,000 a year with 3 to 10 owners, and there's an issue there. It's like the whole business isn't worth what it will cost to litigate this. Like it's just
Right.
not. Like it's they're probably fighting because there's not enough money coming out of it between the number of owners and the operating agreement. They've got different plans, and there's no streamlined way to get people in or out. There's no way to value the business to structure a buyout. So if it's in the operating agreement, I kind of say these are like the worst case scenario things. So when the worst case scenario is written down, the discussions get amazingly productive,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like, oh, none of us want that. So you've already got sort of the alternative. So maybe we can hammer something out, and it feels really good when you can get people over that hump. But I would say that's something that in our side of the world is really important, and you kind of make that about your first brand licensing agreement. You could say that about that. Financing, if you're letting people invest in your company, there's a lot of things you've got to do right, because the downsides under state law. So you're not get your don't. Oh, and the other thing I tell people all the time is, like, if you did your own research and you found the answer you were looking for, you didn't do it right.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not asking the right questions.
Right. And you could say that in law, accounting, marketing. Like, you can say that in almost, if you find the relationship advice, if you search for an answer and you find swiftly and exclusively the answer you were looking for,
Yeah.
it is not, it's at least not the whole answer.
Yeah. One of the things that I see is folks bringing in too many people. The fewer
Absolutely.
people, the more simple everything is. And there are also other ways of sharing the pie than giving
Absolutely.
equity. I don't think
You,
people are creative enough about that.
no, and for example, in most LLCs, under most LLC statutes, you can give economic rights that are not directly related to control rights.
Yeah.
So you can have economic rights without having voting rights.
Yeah.
And that means that people can be an investor without being a partner.
Yeah. Different classes of stock
Right.
make all the difference.
Make all the difference. No, that's certainly something that is sometimes overlooked, and also the we want to do everything equally because we're all equal and we all love each other and this is going to be a great thing. And I was like, gee, I don't want to say that's not the case, but it may not always be the case, and maybe not even because one of you did something. What if one of you gets divorced or decides they want to move to Alaska, or
Right.
there's some other thing that happened, or the market tanks or blows up. There's got to be a way for the unit to repair itself without destroying itself, which is functionally what winds up happening.
Yeah. And I would imagine that when you tell somebody that if they do it right, the exit is easier, I would imagine that that's an easier selling point than saying, well, this is going to go to shit. You better prepare.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true. We have a substantial part of our practice that's M&A related, and people who have good documents get more money. They walk away with more money.
It's the same thing in tech. If you know you're walking into a mess, you have to account for that in your buy price. And when we do takeovers, it's so often a rip and replace because people have screwed it up so badly.
That's we sell tech companies all the time. We
Yeah.
buy usually on the sell side, and when people have because what happens is you come up with a price, and then you go to due diligence. They're like, oh, you didn't say anything about that.
Right.
Like, well,
Disclosures.
maybe they didn't know. Maybe they did know. But
Yeah.
that's an opportunity for the buyer to go, well, we're gonna get a little discount for that.
Yeah.
So always happens.
Yeah. Yeah. It's buying a house. You have that period, and all of it. Discovery is really important, and what you find makes the price change. So, if when people are looking to exit, let's say you have a dispensary and you want to get out, it's time to get out. What
Right.
is the checklist, the quick checklist of what you should have in order to be an attractive purchase, even if your revenues aren't great?
Sure. So valuation is its own subject, but
Yeah.
the check. So first of all, having a good clean cap table with not too many people in it it doesn't have a lot of first rights of refusal or stuff like that. Super helpful, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to want to look at the operating agreement. They're going to look at the capitalization table. By the way, is the who owns what and how much, and that's going to be very, very important. Having good recent financial statements.
Hmm.
They may not have to be audited initially, but if it's March and you don't have your financial statements from last year done on a calendar year basis, that's not a good sign, right? Like if someone's in the business of buying companies, it's like people who know their numbers that generally have had the numbers known for a while. So that's not a good sign. Having all of your regular and material relationships documented, like having all the stuff you buy from, people you sell to, and also having, when you execute those agreements, if they are transferable, at least in the sale, with the sale of substantially all the assets, that's really helpful too, because there may be a case where your customer doesn't want to be a customer of your acquirer, or your source doesn't want to be a source to your acquirer. So if there's a contractual obligation, um, that may at least help you negotiate the transition. Having your employment situation well understood, well documented, being able to show that you've paid all your taxes and that your 941s are up to date and all that other stuff, because you're going to rep and warrant that anyway. And if you have a reasonably sophisticated buyer, they're going to make sure that you promise that that's true, and you also are obligated to make them whole if it's not. So those are sort of we have buy sell checklists that
Mhm.
we go through. So usually when people are, if you think you might, even periodically you might go, oh, gee, not planning to, but I was going to sell my business. What would I do? Great to do that every so often, because then you'll identify what would take you a really long time to do. You might as well start doing it slowly and incrementally because it'll be a little less painful.
Yeah. Yeah. That way people aren't calling you and demanding docs for next week's audit or whatever.
Because if
Yeah.
you just throw your crap in the data room and think the other side's going to sort it out, they're just going to.
They're going to walk. They're
Right.
going to look at that and say, this is a mess. We're here to
Right.
half the price or whatever.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today.
Eric, this is like just you and I having a beer and with the cameras on. So
Totally. Absolutely. I look forward to having a beer with you again soon.
I look forward to it more. Yeah, even more. Let's make it soon. Thanks for inviting me on and let me do this. And
Absolutely.
if you got any questions for me, let me know.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us for this conversation with Seth Gardenswartz. Really, truly a pleasure. Take care, my friend.
Thanks, you too.
All right.